Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Regardless of your political party, regardless of if you are a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, regardless of that, people in California are struggling. People can't afford groceries. Young families can't afford to buy a home. People don't feel safe on the streets. Small businesses are drowning. And people are leaving the state that they love in droves because it just doesn't feel possible to build a life here any further. But what if the problem isn't just bad luck? What if California doesn't have to be this way? What if the problems are driven directly by the policies that are being enacted by our leaders? Today, I don't just want to speak to the people who already agree with me. I want to speak to all Californians who know deep down that something is wrong in our state and that it's time for something to change if we want to continue being a great state and if you and I want to continue being able to live here. So please, hear me clearly. You don't have to become MAGA. You don't have to agree with everything that I say politically or even become a conservative. You don't have to abandon every value or every reason for why you have ever voted Democrat in your life. But I just want us to stop today and ask the question, are things working? Are you better off here under the Democratic governance that we have had for over a decade? And if things are not working, if things are dysfunctional, as we all can feel that they are in our state, then isn't it the reasonable choice, as the primary is just 1 week away, to make a different decision, to vote differently than maybe you have before? Isn't it reasonable to assume that things need to change? But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And this show would not be possible without our amazing brand partners, one of whom is Brick. And Brick I use literally every day to drastically reduce my screen time, to make sure I'm not mindlessly scrolling. It is safe to say it has completely changed my life. It's a little device that is so great for making sure that you can get off your phone and get back to living in the real and wonderful world. Everyone should own a Brick, so use my link below to get 10% off your order and to support the show. So, like I said, today's episode is for all Californians. And so maybe you find yourself here and you don't agree with everything that I would say about every political view, but I hope that you can hear me out on who you should vote for in this upcoming primary, and then ultimately who you should be voting for in the November election. And I want to start our discussion by acknowledging something important, and that is to say, I understand why you would vote Democrat. I actually do understand that. I don't think that everyone who has ever voted for a Democrat has some malintent or is uninformed or is incompetent. All the things you might hear maybe from the conservative side. I don't believe that at all. I think that sometimes there can be bad intent. And I think that sometimes there can also be false representation by people who want to be elected into leadership. And so I want to acknowledge that a lot of the Democrat leadership that we've had in California makes promises that sound really good. And they often sound super compassionate. And so if you care about trying to solve the homelessness crisis for more than just the fact that you don't want to see homeless people, if you care because you want those people to have another chance, you want those people to get off the street, then Democrats would propose affordable housing. They say, well, we can get people off the street. We can get them in shelters. We can get them in homes. And so doesn't that sound so great? Doesn't it make sense that we would build housing and we would give it for free to people who are in need? Or additionally, maybe you're feeling the weight of the cost of living in California. And so Democrats would say, we want to raise the minimum wage. We want to put money back in the pockets of people in our state. And so we want to have greater welfare programs. We want to have greater income being given to people who are maybe in those lower tax brackets. And so we're going to raise that minimum wage. And that sounds really good. It sounds like they care about working people. Or what about immigration? They say no human is illegal, and they want to fight vehemently for everyone's right to live here regardless of their immigration status. And so a lot of promises are made and a lot of policies are proposed, and they all sound very compassionate. They sound like they will genuinely help people. And so if that is your heart, I understand that. And I think that we need to come together to agree that with intention, the intention can be good. And the intention really of both sides often is not that different. The intention is to protect the vulnerable. The intention is to try to fix and address some of these ills that have been plaguing our society or our state. And the approach is often what is different. But what is important to understand, what we have to be able to agree on, is that intention does not equal outcome. And so you could have all of the best intentions in the world, but if the promises you make produce outcomes that actually make the problems worse, if the promises you make produce outcomes that hurt people or that hurt certain groups of people that are more vulnerable, who deserve protection from the government level, then we need to step back and we need to evaluate, did you do what you said you were going to do? Do the outcomes of your policies actually align with the intention that you set out to have from the beginning? And if those things do not align, if we can look honestly at those things and we can say that the outcomes have been harmful, then maybe it's time to choose a different path. Maybe it's time to break from party loyalty and say that that doesn't matter as much as it matters to actually have effective policies that will help our state and will help the people who live here. And I actually think that immigration, though it is a hot button issue, and though if you are a Democrat or you identify that way, you may feel strongly about this, I think immigration is a really good example of policy issues where the intention might be good from the outset, and yet it might have bad outcomes that we need to consider. Because you might believe Gavin Newsom when he says that he wants to protect the sanctuary status of California because he believes that no human is illegal, and he believes that there are hardworking immigrants who live here and who have lived here for years and who have built their families and who are peaceful in our society, and we should not be deporting them. That is why he wants to protect the sanctuary status. You might agree with that and say, that makes sense. I want to protect people who are coming to America to seek a better life, even if they do so illegally. But there are two sides to every equation, which means when you have compassion for one person, you have to look at the same time as another person who could be affected. And when you look at both sides, then we have to weigh, who does the government have a greater responsibility, a greater duty to? Who do they have an obligation to in order to serve and to protect? And so while you may pose the question of how do we care for people who want to come to our country, you also, from a government and policy perspective, have to pose the question, how does having open borders or how does having sanctuary policies for illegal immigrants, how does that affect the people who live in my state? What impact does that have on public safety? What impact does that have on public resources, on our state budget, on the programs that are run, on the welfare that is handed out? And what impact does that have on the weight of citizenship in our country? What kind of precedents do we set? What do we incentivize? So there are two sides to compassion. You can have compassion for the illegal immigrant, and you also can have compassion for the citizen who lives in California. And you have to look at the outcome of the policies that you put in place. And when we do that with immigration, I would want to persuade you that while there are some people who live here peacefully, there are also people who come here illegally who are criminals. And that is a fact, because when we look at it, it was released that since January of 2025, California has released over 4,500 people with ICE detainers. We do not cooperate with ICE, so they have released them back into communities and back into the society, who have had convictions for homicide, convictions for sexual offenses, convictions for assault and robbery. So does that mean that every single illegal immigrant is a criminal? No. But does it mean that there are thousands of illegal immigrants who are criminals and who are allowed to live in our society and maybe live on your street, though they have these convictions for heinous crimes? Yes. And so now we have to ask, does having compassion for one group broadly put another at risk? And the answer becomes yes. Compassion for all illegal immigrants across the board equally to protect all of them means that you will put citizens or residents of California at greater risk because we have allowed them back into society, and some of them are unvetted and some of them are criminals. And so that no longer is just a, well, I just have compassion or I just have empathy type of question. That's a weighing of the compassions to say which group should you prioritize. promoting illegal immigration, or at least allowing for it and allowing it to go unchecked and rampant across our state, incentivizes all sorts of crime. Because when you open the borders, or when there is no actual consequence for coming here illegally, when you're allowed to stay, when you're allowed to partake in welfare, when you're allowed to work, even though you may not be authorized to be here, that incentivizes other bad actors like human trafficking. And so ultimately what we've seen with illegal immigration as the main group at risk is children, because we see that a federal review found that more than 4,000 instances of unaccompanied minors were entering the country due to trafficking circumstances because they were allowed to just walk across the border under the Biden administration. And so who is that impacting? Well, that's impacting a very vulnerable group of people, specifically children who cannot fight for, who cannot defend, and who cannot protect themselves. But there's a greater market for it because people know that they can come into our country illegally. And so this has affected California specifically because in July of last year, federal authorities raided farms here in California, in Camarillo specifically, and rescued 14 children who were being trafficked and forced to work illegally against their will. And so now we see it's not so cut and dry. It's not just a question of, well, I have compassion for the foreigner, for the immigrant. You also have to balance your compassion for the immigrant with also justice for the communities that live here, for the people who have been affected by criminal illegal immigrants, for the people that we have seen who've been affected by these trafficking rings, by drug crime, by gang crime. And all of that has been further perpetuated by the allowance of illegal immigration. And so what is my broader point here? My broader point is that any policy that is going to put the needs of one person, or namely a criminal, some type of group, over the needs of a more vulnerable group like children, who we should be required to protect because they cannot protect themselves, is a bad policy. That's been a bad outcome. And so while you may have had good intentions to say, I want to help immigrants, you also have to look honestly at the fact that you might help some immigrants who are peaceful and good, and you may also help immigrants who are criminals, and you may also further perpetuate crime. And so now you have to balance those two outcomes. Policy is not written for one individual person. It is not written for the circumstances of your friend or your family member or the person who you think is deserving of being in America, regardless of if they followed the rules or not. Policy is written for the greater good. It is written to protect whole groups of people. And so while we can have conversations about immigration reform, and we can have conversations about what it looks like to actually have a process that works to let people come into our country legally, because I think that that is very important, it does not mean that you now have to forfeit borders or that you can support California's sanctuary policies, that the outcome, the end result, has been greater crime and greater victimization of vulnerable groups. All of that is said not necessarily to convince you on immigration. I didn't really mean to get off on that. All of that is said as an example that California has gotten off course in several different areas that you and I have felt on a daily basis here in our state. And they've gotten off course specifically because of the policies that have been enacted by our leaders, because there has been a muddling of intention and outcome. And so we need to look at the outcomes. We need to look at how they are tied directly to the policies that have been passed by our leaders. And I think that that will make a strong case for why you should elect a different leader entirely. Not everything that sounds compassionate is compassionate. Just because someone says their intention is compassionate doesn't mean that what they do will actually serve to be compassionate to groups of people who our government has a duty to look out for and to protect. So California has gotten off course, and we need to look at some of the areas that voters think are the most important in this primary and in this midterm election. And so let's start with California's most basic question and the most basic issue that voters care about, and that is, can you actually afford to live in this state? When it comes to cost of living, it is top of mind for voters because the answer to that question for most people in our state really is no. And it's shocking when you break down the statistics of the cost of living in our state because it's more than just a feeling. It's also proven out in data. So for instance, the median home price in California is projected for 2026 to reach $905,000. That is mind-blowing. $905,000. There are states in our country where you can go buy a standard home, a starter home, for like $200,000 to $300,000. And that is unfathomable to me as someone who lives in our state, because a cheap house here is like $600,000 to $700,000. But that's because our median home price is nearly $1 million. And just for context, that is 112% higher than the rest of the nation. That's higher than the national average by over 100%. That's staggering. I didn't even believe those numbers when I saw them, and I live here. Like, I understand how expensive it is here, but it's still wild to see it actually put out in the numbers. Just to give also perspective on who can afford that, only 23% of households across our state actually make the income that is required to purchase that expensive of a home. And so we have nearly 80% of our population unable to afford a basic home in our state because it is so expensive. But more than homes, because homes is just one thing, more than homes, groceries are 15% higher than the national average. 15% higher just to go to the store. And on top of that, Californians spend more per month on food than people do in any other state across the nation. And then that doesn't even mention that the fact that we have the highest income tax rate in the country. We have up to 13.3% in the highest income tax bracket, which is more, again, than any other state. So it is clear, not just from experience, but also from data, that California is so expensive, astronomically more expensive than anywhere else that you want to live in the United States. And so the question has to be, what is unique about California? Yes, there is greater demand. Yes, we're a beautiful state, but there are a lot of beautiful states across our country, and there are a lot of places that people desire to live outside of just Los Angeles or San Francisco. And so really, we see the strong connection between governance, between policies. The fact that California's cost of living is 43% higher than the national average across the board in all areas, which is insane. But the fact that it is that is, again, not a result of bad luck. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's the direct downstream effect of policies that have been passed in our state with regard to economics. Things like I mentioned of raising that minimum wage. Things like very restrictive zoning laws and very burdensome regulations when it comes to building that have disincentivized building over the years, and so has left us with a lack of supply in the housing market. Things like environmental regulations that, again, sound really good. We want to help the environment, but at the end of the day, have very marginal gains for the environment while having extremely burdensome and terrible outcomes on the cost of living in California. There are taxes and business regulations that make it really hard to either live here as an individual or to run a business here. And so that is going to hurt our economy. And so these are all choices that are being made by the people that we have elected in order to represent and govern us. And they have led to this outcome where our state is, from the numbers, unlivable. You have to make great sacrifices in order to be able to make it work here in California. And the quality of life, because of the high cost of living, is drastically different from if you were to go live in, say, Tennessee or Florida. So the result of this is that you likely are struggling financially. Most people are struggling financially. People are in debt. People have a really high debt to income ratio. People are underwater. And because of that, people are leaving our state. And so according to the California Department of Finance, we lost nearly 200,000 residents to domestic out-migration in 2024 alone. And studies were showing that the populations who were leaving our state are young people, are people who are highly educated, people who are on the trajectory to be far wealthier because of their potential for success and their potential because of that great education that they have to get jobs and to start businesses. They are leaving our state because they realize that if they stay here and they plant roots here, it's only going to get more difficult for them. And so our talent base and our tax base are leaving our state in droves and leaving us behind. And so that is a problem. That's a problem that our leaders should take very seriously. And they should look honestly to ask themselves, why are people feeling the pressure to move to other states that are far more affordable? And so the fact of the matter is, if you want to change that, if you want California to be more livable, if you want people to stop leaving here because it's expensive, you need to vote for different policies. We have tried these liberal policies. We have tried the Democrat policies. Let's try something different because it has not worked. So I don't know why we would continue to elect more and more radical people on economic policy who are going to further these policies that I mentioned, more regulations, more taxes, higher taxes, more burdens on people. It's going to make the cost of living even worse. We have to change that. We have to vote for something different. But cost of living is not the only issue that we are facing in California. We need to turn to one of California's most visible and one of their most heartbreaking issues, and that is our homelessness crisis. And so we have spent $37 billion on over 30 different homelessness programs and housing programs across our state since 2019. But what are the outcomes? Because we've had intention, we've had leaders who say, we're going to create all of these programs and we're going to put money in the budget toward these programs so that we can get people off the street. But intention is not outcome. So what is the outcome? Between 2019 and 2024, homelessness grew by 25%. And so that has equated to around 36,000 more people who are unhoused and who are living on the street. So even though we have had all of these programs, and even though we have spent billions of dollars on these programs, we have not seen a noticeable decrease in homelessness. And the areas where we have seen a decrease, because there's been, over the years, there have been some fluctuations. Some years are worse and increases, some years are better and they decrease. But where we've seen decreases have actually been because big cities, blue cities like San Francisco and San Jose, have had more moderate leadership come into power. And they have taken a more conservative approach to the homelessness crisis. And so any way that California has improved in this issue at all has actually been because of a move away from Democrat policies and toward more moderate policies. But overall, because our state is democratically run, a lot of the programs have actually been more liberal, and we have seen an overall increase in homelessness, not the decreases that have been promised. And we see that more than just spending money, there's been a complete lack of accountability because the California state auditor had findings that said that our state has failed to track spending and outcomes across all of the 30 programs. And so this is where we see that compassion that is untethered from accountability leaves us with terrible outcomes. It's, again, not compassion at all. You can pour money into a problem indefinitely, but if you're not tracking where that money is going and you're not tracking how it's actually making the problem better, then at the end of the day, it is all a complete waste. And so I believe that every Californian, regardless of their political party, wants people to get off of the streets. I don't think that you, even if you are a Democrat, want people to be homeless. I don't think you want that for your communities. I don't think you want that for them personally. We want people off the streets, but simply wanting it is not enough. We have to take actions that are going to be effective to move us toward that goal. And so when do we reach the point where we say, okay, our leadership, our governance has been bad. It hasn't produced the outcomes that we wanted. It has spent our money up the wazoo. It has taken taxpayer dollars and just thrown it at programs. It can't even tell us how it has spent it. So they don't deserve to be in power any longer. It's time to try a different approach. How much more? More than $37 billion. How much more would it take to convince you to change, to try something different, to see if we could make progress on this issue rather than continuing to believe the people who continue to make promises and promises and promises and never deliver on them? Or let's take an issue like crime and public safety, because I think it's generally agreed upon that we all want to feel safe in the communities in which we live. Well, back in 2014, under Democrat governance, we passed Proposition 47, and I've talked about this many times, but it reclassified certain types of thefts that is under $950. It reclassified that from a felony to a misdemeanor. And at the time, the intention was laid out to say, we want to reduce mass incarceration. We want to have less people in prisons. We don't want people to go to prison or go to jail for something that was a minor crime like shoplifting. And so in order to keep people out of the criminal justice system, we're going to, again, reduce these crimes down to misdemeanors. Sounds pretty good, right? Sounds like we don't want people to just be in prison unnecessarily, but we have to look at the outcome. What was the outcome of this policy? The outcome is that shoplifting shot up by 47.5% as compared to 2019. So We tried it. We tried the policy and it didn't work. It made shoplifting worse because by not having strict consequences for breaking the law, then it incentivized people to break the law even further, which is a fairly logical expectation to have, an outcome of that type of policy. We also saw that a lot of stores moved to locking up a lot of things. If you go to the store, a lot of the products that you want to buy are behind glass and you have to ask for help in order to get them out. We saw that a lot of stores cut their hours back because they would see certain hours where shoplifting was increasing, and they even closed down locations that were just no longer profitable because of so much theft. So we tried Proposition 47. It did not work. And thankfully, voters in 2024 rolled it back. By 70%, voters in California voted to enact Proposition 36, which rolled back Proposition 47's reclassification of those crimes. So it actually increased those crimes back up to felonies. And so that's a beautiful example of voters not just voting along party lines, not just saying, well, this is actually a Democrat policy and this is actually being promoted by our governor because Governor Newsom opposed Proposition 36 and supported Proposition 47. But it's people saying, well, I don't just agree with this because it's a Democrat policy, but saying, I see the increase in crime around me and I want it to stop. Therefore, I'm going to vote for change. And so we need to take what we have done on the level of crime and theft. We need to take that and now we need to apply that statewide to all of California with all of her policy positions. And so here's the most important thing that I want to lay out for you. And that is the question of whether we can actually trust our leadership in our government as it stands to be competent and to be accountable with our taxpayer dollars and with the future of our state. Because the harsh reality is that Democrats have had a supermajority since 1996 in our state in the legislature. Democrats currently have a 75% supermajority of legislative seats, which means that their power is basically unchecked. And most of the decades of California's history since having that legislative supermajority has also had a Democrat governor. So it's not that Democrats haven't had the time. They haven't had enough time to roll out their policies. They haven't had enough of an ability. They've been stopped by conservatives. They've been able to run free. They've been able to run completely unchecked. They've been able to pass pretty much any bill or any policy that they want to in our state for decades. But we can see that it's not working. I mean, can you see that from the data? We see that it's not working. And we see that namely in how our money is even being spent because we face a projected budget deficit of $25 billion per year as being projected by the Legislative Analyst's Office to begin in 2028. And even now we face an $18 billion budget gap, and it's the fourth consecutive deficit that we've seen over the past 4 years in a time when there has been revenue growth. So taxes are up in California. Revenue is actually up in California. I've talked about this before, and yet we are still overspending. We are still in a budget deficit. So our leadership has not only enacted bad policies, they've enacted bad policies with bad outcomes that spend our money and that spend it ineffectively. This should be absolutely unacceptable mismanagement. We should not allow this to continue. They have had their time. They have had the ability to try their policies. They have not worked. And so it's time to remove the one-party rule in California, and it's time to start trying different approaches to see what is going to be more effective. So I would just ask you personally, if you're considering voting for a Democrat, and maybe you're considering that because you've always been a Democrat and you've always voted for a Democrat and you don't align with conservatives on a lot of things, I would ask you how much failure, how much disappointment, how much incompetence is it going to take in our government to convince you personally to try something different, to vote for change, to see that direct connection between the policies that have been in place and to see how they have led to these bad outcomes and to say, we need to change course. So my plea to you as you get ready to cast your ballot or you get ready to go to the polls on Tuesday, my plea to you would be to remember that elections are not marriages. You are not pledging your loyalty to one party forever and always. You are trying to elect leadership. and you are trying to hold your leadership accountable. And so you need to think of it more as hiring someone for a job than it is committing to someone because you said that you would always be this one specific party. And so if your current leaders are failing, and I hope that I have convinced you in some small way that they are failing on certain levels, if they are failing, you need to fire them and you need to bring in someone different. It's like if you had a contractor working on your house and your contractor was constantly going over budget, they were painting things the wrong colors, they were bringing in the wrong appliances, they were making things much worse. How long would you deal with that for? How many years would you let go by before you would say, you are fired and I am trying someone different? It's the exact same here with our leadership. You need to vote for different leadership because it has not worked. So voting differently than maybe you have in the past does not mean you have to abandon all of your values. What it does mean is that you have to do an assessment to see all of the promises that have been made by your leaders and then look honestly at the outcomes to show that those promises have not been kept. And so it is time to actually hold those things accountable. Prolonged failure cannot go completely unchecked. We have to say, again, you had your time, and now you do not deserve your time anymore because you have lied. You have lied to the Californian people. You have put policies in place that have made things worse. And so we need to elect you out of office and elect someone else in office. So I just want to end this plea to you with where I think our focus matters the most, and that is on California itself. I love our state. I really do. From the coastline to the mountains, from the cultural diversity to the innovation and the creativity to the opportunity that California promises. We're a fantastic state. We have so much potential. And even in our failures, we are still a huge economy. Even in all of the failings across the board of homelessness and cost of living and crime and so many more issues that we didn't have time to name today, even with all of our issues, we are still a powerful state and we are still important to our country. And so I believe in us. I believe in California. I don't think that we should give up on fighting for her and on fighting to reform her. But we've been smothered by a completely unaccountable government that has been able to do whatever they want and been able to lie to you again and again and just get away with it. And so if you have voted for a Democrat, I'm not asking you to entirely change your value system, but I am asking you to be honest about the fact that you know deep down that this is not working and that this is not sustainable for our state. You have likely watched friends and family members move out of a state that you love and a state that they likely loved because it just was not feasible to live here and they could not see it getting any better under our current and projected leadership. And so if you are tired of seeing that, if you are tired of our state just being the laughingstock of the country because of all of the failings that we have, then I would encourage you to please consider voting for Steve Hilton. Please consider voting for a Republican. It might be a totally different experience for you, and I understand that. It doesn't have to mean you're conservative, but consider trying something different for the sake of the fact that what has been in place for years has not worked. The most courageous thing that you can do in this election is to not vote out of habit, but to vote out of hope for something better, that we can build something better here in California, that we can restore our state once again. So California does not belong to Republicans or to Democrats. It belongs to the people who live here. And if the people who live here are suffering, as we have clearly seen that they are, then it is time to vote for something different. That is not betrayal of your party. That is not a betrayal of all of your values. That is your responsibility as an American, your responsibility as a Californian, and your responsibility to your fellow neighbors around you. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that it has helped you as you think about the upcoming election. If you like this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week after the primary election for another episode of the California Conversation.